O'Reilly! You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Maui Nui is on a mission to help balance axis deer populations for the good of our environment, communities, and food systems on the island of Maui. They've shared over 126,000 pounds of nutrient-dense protein with the Maui community. Secure your spot now. Become a snack subscriber and join in helping to build more resilient food and ecosystems on Maui. Visit MauiNuiVenison.com. That's MAUINUI venison.com and use promo code BEAR for 20% off your first order.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
I've got a Valentine's card that he sent me when we was about in the 4th grade, I think. On that Valentine's card he sent me, he said, "We bear hunters, ain't we, Roy?" That was his dad.
Alvin David's dad.
Yeah, his dad.
He said, "We bear hunters, aren't we,
We bear
Roy?"
hunters, buddy.
And what grade how old would you have been?
We was in the 4th grade, so ever when that was.
On this episode of the Bear Grease Podcast, we'll continue to explore Southern Appalachia. This is part 2 and the final episode in our series on this region. We'll talk to Mr. Roy Clark and Ira Jones about bear dogs, and we'll dive into the deep end with Dr. Dan Pierce as we try to understand the real story of moonshine, NASCAR, and bear hunting. We'll also talk about a slithery subject, one that you'll have to wait until the end to discover.
The very foundation of NASCAR is illegal liquor.
That is interesting.
NASCAR doesn't like to talk about that, but it's foundational.
My name is Clay Newcomb, and this is the Bear Grease Podcast, where we'll explore things forgotten but relevant, search for insight in unlikely places, and where we'll tell the story of Americans who live their lives close to the land. This is Mr. Roy's grandson, Rael Childress. You would have heard him sing on the previous episode as well. On part 1 of this series on Southern Appalachian culture, we define the region as the southern 1/3 of the Appalachian mountain range. We met the Clark family from East Tennessee and discussed their farming, bear hunting, and we heard them play some music. We then talked to Dr. Daniel Pierce about the history of the region, where the people came from, and how the culture of the region was formed. If you haven't listened to that one, you ought to go back and check it out. On this second and final episode in the series, we'll be talking again with Mr. Roy Clark, but we'll also meet his friend Ira Jones as we dive deeper into their bear hunting. And I'll jump back to Dr. Pierce, and we'll discuss moonshine and NASCAR and one secret topic. Before I jump in, I want to reiterate a few things. Number 1, the Appalachian region is a very diverse and modern part of the United States. I've chosen to highlight rural Appalachia just because I love it, and I know some great people that are a part of it. Secondly, You may remember the conclusion we came to at the end of the last podcast. Understanding the mechanisms of why things are the way they are grants us a better opportunity of valuing that culture and the culture of someone else. I think that's important. I'm not trying to make heroes or villains. I'm just trying to tell an American story. Tell me what makes a good-looking Plott hound to you.
Well, just see how tight he's made and how he's not real big, and he's put together good and stands up good on his front feet and straight and stuff.
Yeah.
See how straight that little bitch's front feet is?
Okay, straight. So you want their legs just to go down
yeah,
straight.
some of them float out that way, and some of them ain't, but...
This is Mr. Roy Clark and his friend Ira Jones looking over a fine pack of Plott bear dogs.
Who's your favorite color?
He is.
So that color right there, how would you describe that color?
Black brindle.
Black
Said
brindle.
at 20 yards it looks black, and you get up to it and you can see the brindle in it. So right here, you can see it, but if he was right down yonder, he's just a black dog.
Yeah.
And I've paid attention to that when he told me that, been a long time ago, and I look for that a lot. But he said 20 yards, they just look black, and then you get right up on them, you start seeing them stripes.
Or in a bar and you tie them up, they're black dogs. They're black, you know.
Roy's life in Appalachia, he is Southern Appalachian, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's, from the music to the way you're welcome. You'll never come here that you won't feel welcome.
That's
I
right.
don't care if it's at midnight, you'll feel welcome. His wife will make you feel that way. He'll make you feel that way. His nephew, all the family will. Scott, son-in-law, and they're wonderful people. And that's Southern Appalachian right there.
That's the voice of Mr. Ira Jones, who is a friend and hunting partner of Roy Clark. These two breed and raise hunting dogs together. However, to understand the closeness of their friendship, I'll need to fill you in on a cultural nuance that may not be intuitive. It's this: raising bear dogs together requires a high-level human bond. Much trust is involved. Family lines of dogs are typically closely guarded, not because they want to be kept from others, but simply because they've got no dogs to spare and they simply aren't for sale. In a pet world, you can buy stud services or puppies from breeders, but in many parts of the bear hound world, this isn't the case. All this to say is that Ira is a great friend of Roy.
Well, I just, listening here and thanking Roy and our friendship. And one thing that really stands out a lot to me with Roy is, to have a friend, you got to be a friend. And Roy really understands that as good as anybody I know. And, we all like the good times in our life. And when things are good, when things ain't going so good or a little sickness and trouble, you count on Roy. He'll call on you. And he's consistent in that. And, I was listening to him talking about some of the hunting, and he's the very best at this right here. He wants everybody to have a good time. Most people you hunt with would rather show you their dogs. And you're hunting with me today, and Roy, he worries about everybody on the hunt to have a good time. He wants his dogs to do good, and they will. They're well-polished hounds. He wants everybody else to have a good time too and get their dogs in. And that stuff is just foreign to a lot of people. It's very competitive anyway, and Roy does his best to keep that out of it. And he's a man of his word, and what he says he means, and he's truthful in it, and he's awesome. He really is. I've never met anybody like him, and I truly mean that. He knows how to be a friend, and that's something that most of us forgot. We want friends. We don't really like being a friend sometimes.
Yeah. Ira went on to talk some about Plott hounds.
No doubt. When you're talking about dogs, and I've hunted a lot, you're going to see some good ones and all of them, bad ones and all of them. And we're not claiming the Plott dog is a superior, number one meat every need you got. But it's, if you get behind it, I've always said this: just because the dog is brindle, don't mean that I might look at him a little closer. But it's about bloodlines. And that's something that we're pretty rich into, is the bloodlines. We're not just hunting a color; we're hunting a particular type of dog that his family for generations has had big influence in. And I like to feel like we've had a little influence in a bloodline as well on our side of things. And these, that's kind of where it's at. It's these bloodlines. I was looking today before I come over at some papers. I was trying to track down some papers, and just looking back and how far back we're going on some of these dogs, and I like that. And, heavy fan of line breeding. I know Roy is.
Tell me what song you're singing, Jill.
Hound Dog Blues.
Hound Dog Blues. What's this song about?
The Hound Dog Blues.
Sad hound dogs? Can't be Plott hounds. They're sad. This is Jill, Mr. Roy's daughter.
See. Well, your old hound dog, he sure looks a lot like you. Your old hound dog, he sure looks a lot like you. Every time I see him, I always get the hound dog blues. Hound dog blues. Play it around.
Mr. Roy is 72 years old and a native of East Tennessee. I asked him about his history with the breed of dog that he's been involved with his whole life. Tell me about your history with Plott hounds in East Tennessee.
It's just like what I said. I was born into bear hunting, and I was sort of born into Plott hound dogs too. I ain't saying that made them be better dogs than other dogs. That's just sort of what I growed up with. And we sort of had some Plotts in. My grandpa had a Plott or two, and Daddy had a Plott or two. But then when Charles Gant come into the picture, which was in the early 50s, and then he bred Plotts, and him and Daddy went places and got dogs that they bred, that Charles bred to start with to get his foundation going, and he made a big breeder of Plott hounds. So we had Plotts to hunt, and we could get anything we wanted off of Charles and hunt it, whether we kept it or not, just back and forth, Mm-hmm. And I guess I just grew to the Plott dog, but then I've owned a number 1 Walker and a number 1 Blue Tick, and a few more that's been mixed up through the years, early years, that could match up to the Plott dogs. But I guess as a whole, I've just got to see more out Plotts and I have anything else. I actually believe, my belief on the Plott dogs is they all ain't going to make number 1 bear dogs. But I believe you'll get more out of Plott dogs than you will any other breed. I really believe that. Now, there's people that probably won't agree with me there.
You folks are a very diverse audience, so I've got to explain something very serious that just happened. A small percentage of you just got your feelings hurt when Mr. Roy declared his devoted allegiance and love of the Plott dog, because you don't hunt Plotts, and you wish that this podcast was about the breed of dog that you hunt. And there's a much smaller group of you who are Plott dog junkies that just got validated and are pumping that 5-star rating on iTunes right now. This is exactly why I love houndsmen. They're so dang passionate. But most of you people don't have any reference at all of what a good breed of bear dog is. So you have to trust me when I say that this is a contentious topic that nary a podcaster dare delve into. You see, there are multiple breeds of hounds. The United Kennel Club registers Treeing Walkers, Blue Ticks, Black and Tans, Red Bones, English, and American Leopard hounds. All of these breeds can be used for bear hunting, and Plotts are a minority percentage by far. most would agree that some variation of the Walker Hound dominates the hound world. Walkers are a beautiful tricolored white, black, and brown dog. They're wildly popular, and that's probably why this podcast isn't about them. The Plott dog is known for the cult-like devotion of their owners and the unique story of the formation of the breed. But that's for a future conversation. Consider yourself informed. So the Plott hound was developed in these mountains in this region. What does a Plott dog mean to you besides just being a dog that you can use to go catch a bear? I mean, do you feel like you have some deep emotional connection to a Plott hound?
Yeah, I feel that, and I've got too many now. But it's sort of like owning, say, a wrecking horse or a walking horse, and you get used to them. Well, then a quarter horse or a non-gaited horse that trots and jars you to death, you don't like that. You like that good smooth ride of that run and walk or that wrecking horse. You get close to the Plotts, and to me, they'll make a house dog, a bear dog, and maybe the quietest dog you ever seen. Might be the best bear dog you ever seen. And I'm sure if you had walkers or you had blue ticks or you had something else, and that's what you bred and that's what you got used to, that's what you'd like. But I just got into the Plotts and I had an easy access to them, and that's just what I liked.
Well, it really is part of the mountain culture over here, and the story of the Plott hound is so unique.
I guess, that we was live so close to where the Plott started from that they give us we had a better shot at getting Plotts and stuff. Well, I just say this much about the hunting and Iris sitting right over there can vouch for me a little bit. I've bear hunted a long time, and I've mostly hunted Plott dogs, but everybody can hunt whatever they want to. That's just what I've mostly hunted. And I feel like in my lifetime that we've owned some as good of dogs as you could bear hunt. And I feel good about the dogs that we've owned and bred and trained ourselves and not had to go out and buy dogs, didn't have the money to buy them no way. And all the dogs we've used is what we've trained ourselves. So I feel like that's a good accomplishment, and I feel like I've owned dogs that I would have hunted with anybody that wanted to bear hunt. And I don't feel like I'd been ashamed of it.
That's saying something.
That's what I think, anyway.
In effort to understand hunting and the human bond it produces, I want to let you listen to a short clip, which is completely taken out of context, so you have to pay attention for it to make sense. But the moment involves real tears. In 2019, on my former podcast, the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast, I interviewed Mr. Roy and the Laurel Mountain Bear Hunters, which is basically the longtime friends that he hunts with. It includes fathers, sons, daughters, old and young alike. In this clip, Mr. Roy is talking about a Valentine's Day card he got when he was in the 4th grade from a man named Floyd Ray Ford, who is not in the room. But Floyd's son, Alvin David, is in the room and is now in his mid-50s. Alvin David is not mic'd up, but Mr. Roy's attention turns to Alvin David, and he begins to speak to him.
I've got a Valentine's card in there that he sent me when we was about in the 4th grade, I think. And on that Valentine's card he sent me, he said, "We bear hunters, ain't we, Roy?" That was his dad.
Alvin David's dad.
Yeah, his dad.
He said, "We bear hunters, aren't we,
We bear
Roy?"
hunters, buddy.
And what grade how old would you have been?
We was in the 4th grade, so ever when that was. How long ago would that be?
About 9 years old, right?
Yeah.
9, something like that.
So you went ahead and just stuck with that identity, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. His daddy sort of left us, come and went some. He's back now. Maybe he'll stay. But that boy right yonder ain't never fired today, buddy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love him. I'm I love it too.
Yep.
That just shows you, Clay, what it means to us. You know, it's beyond just going out and having a big time hunting.
Yeah.
It's beyond just a group of guys here hanging out in Roy's house. You know, it's our life. You know, it's something we've all grown up doing all the way back through, and it's just it's a bond.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. It really is.
Son, he won't leave you, buddy. He won't leave you out there. I don't care how long you have to stay.
Yeah. I wanted to get a perspective from Mr. Roy about moonshine in the region. Part of this section you would have heard in part 1 of this series.
My daddy and grandpa and uncle and some of their close friends and stuff probably turned me against drinking and stuff because they stayed drunk all the time.
So you don't drink?
No, I ain't never drunk.
So you saw the moonshine as a negative thing. You know, because there's a stereotype. This region is known for making moonshine and liquor, and it's kind of been glorified in some way. But there was a lot of real negative stuff that came with that as well.
If there was anything to moonshine that was good out of it, to me, would have been selling it and getting the money to have to live on.
Yeah.
Other than that, I didn't see nothing good out of it.
Yeah.
And I always thought to myself, I ain't going to never drink because I put up with it my whole life, and I ain't going to be like that. For somebody to have to put up with me like that.
Yeah. We've now heard from Mr. Roy and Mr. Ira Jones. We've heard them talk about their bear hunting and dogs and a bit about moonshine. Now I want to shift gears and talk again with Dr. Daniel Pierce of the University of North Carolina, Asheville. He's an author and national authority on the Southern Appalachian culture, and I want to talk with him about moonshine, NASCAR, and bear hunting. All of these things he's written extensively about in his books. You can look some of them up. And we'll tiptoe into the bonus topic that I did not want to advertise, but I'm about to leak it out. Snake handling churches. So tell me about how liquor played an influence in the culture here.
It was huge. You know, for one thing, my mother doesn't like this at all. You know, culturally, one of these things that this Scots-Irish brought was the Gaelic word, I can't even pronounce it, but for liquor is like water of life, And so, I mean, it was a big part of life.
It was just common.
There are stories.
Even though they were Protestants, a lot of them were Protestant.
Even though they're Protestant, I mean, prohibition doesn't come into the picture really until the late 1800s, early 20th century. There was no disability. I mean, you could be a Baptist preacher, and Jack Daniels, who was it? I think it was his adopted father, who taught him, how to make liquor, supposedly, was a preacher, So there wasn't any sort of disability, during that period of the late 1700s and first half or really to the end of the 1800s about making or drinking liquor, as long as the churches would frown on people being drunk all the time or being abusive and stuff. But, liquor was a big part of culture. It was a big part of medicine. People would say, okay, here are good herbs, but you really need the liquor to make it work. And of course, the liquor made you at least feel a little better, dull the pain, that type of thing. So it was a big part of cures.
Did the actual distillation of what would become known as moonshine, was that process unique to America, or was that exactly what they were doing in Ireland?
Yeah. It's
same thing.
It's the same thing. Yeah. And again, in a lot of cases, they would bring a small still with them. The cultural importance, the economic importance is huge. And people have this notion about subsistence and how people provided for all their own needs. But there's certain things you can't do with that. One of those things is you can't pay your taxes. You can't pay your property tax. And these people had to pay property tax in order to keep their land. There weren't a lot of ways to get cash. There were some like medicinal herbs, like ginseng in particular, that had high value, or you sold hogs or cattle. But the most dependable source of cash for people in this region, and this continued after you get into the federal excise tax, which makes much of it production illegal, is liquor.
So in the 20th century, there was a prohibition on liquor. I'm trying to find out how this was illegal, because there was a time when it wasn't. So there was a prohibition on liquor, and people were making it illegally. And then number two, I guess it would have been people making untaxed liquor, or making liquor illegally and it not being taxed. So describe to me how it was became so taboo.
So original, I mean, people look at this, and talk about moonshine, and they say, oh, prohibition. And I say, well, for 40 years or so, it's not prohibition, because 1862, the U.S. Congress passes an excise tax on liquor, which is still in effect to this day. Now, that had been tried once before by Alexander Hamilton, resulted in the Whiskey Rebellion in Pennsylvania, and widespread ignoring of it in other parts of the country. Thomas Jefferson got elected, at least partly because he pledged that when he got elected, that excise tax on liquor was going away, and it did. And so for up until 1862, from roughly 1801 to and before Alexander Hamilton, it was perfectly legal to make
anybody
liquor.
could make it.
Anybody can
untaxed.
make it. Sell it any amount. 1862, of course, this is in the midst of the Civil War. It didn't have much impact, or it didn't have any impact in the Confederate States. But then once the war's over with, they're subject to this excise tax. So you had to make a decision to pay the tax. One, in order to get a license to make liquor, you had to make a significant amount. Most of these people are making, relatively small amounts for their own consumption and for, as a barter item or, a cash item. And they're not making enough to qualify. Even if you are, and if you're making, right just over the limit, you're not making enough to make any profit.
I can see what's happening here. They're getting set up for kind of a outlaw liquor culture.
Well, you can't. Again, this is deeply embedded in their culture. This is incredibly
and then all
important.
All of a sudden, the government comes in, who they probably distrust anyway.
Well, it's the federal government, in Confederate states.
Yeah.
I mean, and
this
of course,
is a train wreck waiting to happen.
There are plenty of unionists like my kin, who my great-great-grandfather fought for the Union Cavalry, and so, and that whole thing of independence, and this is my right, this is my God-given right to make liquor, and of course, not a lot of respect for the federal government in much of the region, and even people that supported the Union didn't think it was appropriate for the government to do this, and again, for most people, they couldn't make any profit off of making it legally and paying the tax, and so you have to ask yourself the question, okay, am I going to make it legally? That's pretty much out of the question for most people. Or am I going to quit making it? Or am I going to make it illegally? And there is kind of a misconception about moonshine, because not everybody who's making moonshine is like a career moonshine maker. These are mainly small farmers who make it in the off months. It's kind of an off, after the harvest and before you start planting. And it's cooler. That's a better time to make liquor anyway. You don't want to make it in hot weather. It's hard. It doesn't make as good a liquor. And so, that's part of their seasonal thing, and so most people are doing it, again, not making a lot. But now, of course, they have to get more creative in terms. They can't just go walk in the store now, with a load of liquor and exchange it or get cash for it. So they got to find new ways to market it.
And then when Prohibition comes in the 30s, when did Prohibition?
Prohibition comes in actually in much of the southern Appalachian region. Most states passed what were called local option laws, where like a county or a municipality could make their liquor laws. And so they may say you can't make liquor within so many miles of a school or a church or something like that. And pretty quickly a lot of counties go dry. And then you get statewide movements, like North Carolina, for instance, becomes a dry state in one of the first in the South in 1909.
1909.
So well before national prohibition. Much of the South.
Does that mean you couldn't buy or sell?
Can't buy, sell, make legally. And so this eliminates the legal thing, which is great if you're an illegal producer. Prohibition's the best thing that ever happened to these guys.
Because demand.
Because the demand skyrockets for them because there's no legal production, there's no legal sale.
This is a good place to give an overview. National prohibition was in effect from 1920 to 1933, and during this time, making or selling alcohol was illegal. So overnight, distilling liquor became an incredibly profitable business. However, in many states and counties, it was illegal long before that, and many made it illegally to avoid taxation and permitting. Maybe this is obvious, but moonshine got its name because distillers made liquor at night under the light of the moon. The process requires heat, which means you have to have fire, and fire makes smoke, which can be seen in the daylight. Prohibition led to a period of organized crime that was fueled by distillers. Speakeasies started to pop up all over the country, which were basically secret and illegal bars where illicit alcohol was served.
Dooley was a good old boy, he lived below the mill. Dooley had 3 daughters and a 40-gallon still. One girl watched the boiler, the other watched the spout. Mama corked the bottles and old Dooley fetched them out. Dooley sitting and holler, Dooley trying to make $1. Dooley give me a swaller and I'll pay you back someday. And I'll pay you back someday.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. I don't know if you stopped in at an O'Reilly lately, but I use one because we have one right not too far from my house. People there are super helpful. I don't care if I'm getting boat batteries, car parts, whatever. Love those guys. They got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you don't have to worry if you're in a jam. The team at O'Reilly Auto Parts can test your battery for free, in or out of your car. If it needs to be replaced, they'll help you find just the right battery for your vehicle. If you need your windshield wipers replaced, a brake light fixed, quick service, they'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. Whether you are a car aficionado or an auto novice, you will find the employees at O'Reilly Auto Parts to be knowledgeable, helpful, and best of all, friendly. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things do-it-yourself auto. You can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/meat-eater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/meat-eater.
Whitetail Institute launched the food plot revolution in 1988 with a concentration on research and real-world testing of forage products specifically for whitetail deer. Whitetail Institute's research and development team of agronomy experts provide effective, personalized service. I've been using Imperial whitetail clover for a long time in a food plot back behind my house. In 2007, I killed the biggest buck of my life over an Imperial whitetail clover small quarter-acre food plot. Imperial whitetail clover is the only clover scientifically developed through years of selective breeding. Clover extreme genetic stability provides extreme cold tolerance, disease, and drought tolerance. It really does. Clover is coated with Whitetail Institute's Rain Bond, a polymer coating added for enhanced seedling survivability. They have an exclusive offer for Bear Grease listeners, 15% off Imperial Clover when you use the code BEAR at whitetailinstitute.com. That's whitetailinstitute.com and use code BEAR for 15% off. Sport Dog is the most recognized brand in the hunting dog training industry. Born in 2003 in Knoxville, Tennessee, Sport Dog was forged by a passionate group of hunters and dog trainers who intimately understood the challenges of the field and the special connection between hunters and their dogs. The people at Sport Dog know that having a well-trained hunting dog is more than just having a reliable partner. It's a commitment to their safety and unlocking their full potential. The Sport Dog promise to customers is simple: gear the way you design it. Every product Sport Dog builds is meticulously designed and rigorously tested in the field, ensuring it withstands the toughest conditions you and your dog may encounter. Trust Sport Dog, where innovation meets passion, to elevate your hunting experience and strengthen the bond with your local companion. Using tracking equipment on my squirrel and coon dogs is extremely important to me. To track my squirrel dogs and my one old coon dog that's not very good. Get 20% off your first purchase using the code BEARGREASE. Go to www.sportdog.com/beargrease to learn more. Back to Dr. Pierce.
You know, there is some evidence that prohibition may have lowered consumption a little, but the demand doesn't go away.
Clear that it's a setup. I mean, like if you understand culture at all, you see how this would become something that would be, in some ways, very negatively viewed upon by some groups, and then other groups very positively. Just like it would become significant in the culture just by the way the laws were set up.
And particularly in rural areas. I mean, you know, you get most of your prohibition coming out of the towns and the growing cities. And, you know, mill owners are very interested in it because they don't want their workers drinking, you know. And there's a racial component, too. They want to keep alcohol out of the hands of African Americans because they see that as a disruptive thing and potential trouble there. And so a lot of this actual prohibition stuff comes in alongside white supremacy campaigns and Jim Crow laws and stuff like that, you know, in the early 20th century.
Let me ask you this. I had somebody that I really respect give this perspective to me, and he's an Appalachian guy, big time. He said that the moonshiners, and I think he was particularly talking about the moonshiners during Prohibition, were like the meth dealers of our time. And so his whole point is, why are we glorifying these guys that had such a negative effect on society? And I'm certain there are situations where what he's saying is like 100% true, because he said, Clay, there's been a lot of Appalachian women and kids beaten, neglected because of moonshine, and and he had a strong point to me. Tell me, do you feel like that's an accurate depiction?
Well, it's part of the story, and there are families that you can trace and say, okay, moonshine. They made moonshine in the and that continues, and then they get into the late '60s or something. That market dries up. They start growing marijuana, and then later they're going to move into meth and stuff like that. So that happens, and for sure, moonshine. And I always in homage to my mother, I always have to point out the negative sides of this, So there's a lot of downside to it, in terms of what it did to families. The other thing is that people kind of now, because there's kind of a almost craft moonshine movement now, and then the quote legal moonshine business, and there are these notions about, these fine liquor makers. Most of the stuff they made was just horrible. I mean, and they would and of course, because it's not regulated, who knows what's in it, and they used all kinds of things from chicken manure to lye to Buckeyes to, anything, because what they wanted to do, and one other thing, when Prohibition comes on big time, the whole recipe for liquor changes, and it's much less corn and a lot of refined sugar, which distills much quicker and at a higher proof than just corn. The traditional recipe was, basically you got cornmeal, you got corn malt and water, and you let it sit for a week in barrels or something like that, and it makes what they call a beer, and then you take that, you pour it in a still, and you distill it, and it goes through the coil and all that. But that changes, and this sugar liquor, as they called it, we call it Busthead and Stingo, and it's just bad stuff. And again, you don't know what's in it, and again, particularly later when you get like people start using galvanized metal, I mean, you get a lot of.
So you get some people getting sick or dying.
Well, you get
from
people
bad
dying,
liquor.
because of the lead acetate,
really?
that goes into it. People are using, car radiators for condensers, so you don't know. And so there are a lot of potential problems. On the other side of that, and I think the thing that's missing from a lot of moonshine stories is that for a lot of people, they were involved in this business for a relatively short period of time, usually probably as a young man. Or as, one thing I found lots of women involved, particularly in selling, widows, women who've been abandoned. And so people use it as kind of an insurance kind of thing, or as a way as a young person to get together, what they call a grub stake, make some cash money, buy land or, do whatever, and then you go. I've got a friend who's written a really good book called The Spirits of Just Men, and he kind of looks at his own family history as kind of a framework for this book on moonshine. And his grandfather told him, like when he was at 8, he had no clue. His grandfather was like a pillar of the community in a rural community in Virginia. Just, he'd deacon in the Baptist church and so respected in the community, total teetotaler. And he tells him that, when I was 14, I left home. I went to work in a cotton mill. And when I had enough money, I got a car. And then I started hauling liquor to West Virginia, to the coal towns. And it was like he was shocked, And so, he couldn't believe it. But, he made enough money. He comes back home with this money. He buys land again, and he's the pillar of the community, and never breathes a word of what he'd done. So there's so many families. So again, there's that negative side, but there's also this side where it was, again, for a lot of people, a way that they could hold on to their land or buy land or, get started in life or get through a bad patch in their life. And one of the things, because there's kind of this notion about moonshiners kind of being these ignorant rednecks, stupid, overall wearing hillbillies. A lot of your moonshiners were your more, I think, intelligent, entrepreneurial types. And some of these people, got pretty successful at it. In fact, if you look, one of the things, there are a lot of things I can't prove, but I believe pretty strongly. You can look at some major, lots of businesses and even major international corporations who got their start and finance capital from proceeds of illegal alcohol. Because these people, and if you're really good at it, and some of these people, by the 20s, 30s, 40s, they're making millions.
Wow.
And if you got that much cash, you can't walk into a bank with it.
You got to do something with it.
You got to do something with it. And so, you can see, and it's really interesting to look at some of these really heavily, counties that have a big reputation in terms of moonshine, and then look at some of the corporations that come out of these places, and you got to ask, okay, or banks even.
They got their start in some old money.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's an interesting. For most people though, it's part of subsistence. It's part of getting by. It's part of paying my property taxes.
Yeah. This is a good place to tell you a family story related to moonshine. My family. Such stories are fairly common in this part of the world. You may remember my sweet mother, Judy, from a few podcasts back. We call her Juju. She's as close to a perfect mom as possible, but there are a few mysterious secrets lurking in our family's past. Her father, Houston Millsap, was born in 1916 near Waldron, Arkansas. He became a teenager during the peak of federal prohibition. The full story isn't known, but he worked for a family of moonshiners that the authorities were dead set on busting. We don't think he was involved in actually making liquor, but he was associated with this family. When he was 16 years old, he was apprehended and questioned about his knowledge of the illegal operation. His mouth was sealed shut, and he would not leak a drop of information. This is where some of the mystery lies. I don't know how they got away with this, but because he wouldn't talk, they sent him away to a juvenile detention center for an extended period of time. My mother was told that, quote, when he came back, he was skinny and wouldn't talk about what happened there. Couple of things here, potentially positive and negative. When my father spoke of his father-in-law, he said Houston was honest to a fault. He wouldn't turn in those moonshiners even when it would have gotten him out of trouble. This was viewed as honorable. However, my mother and wife collectively said to me, Clay, if your son was working for some meth dealers and went to jail because he wouldn't tell on them, do you think that would be honorable? The time in that detention center changed Houston's life, most likely for the worst. These ladies make a strong point. With that story, we're going to switch gears. Dr. Pierce wrote a book called Real NASCAR, White Lightning, Red Clay, and Big Bill France. I wanted to get some context on NASCAR. Dr. Pierce, tell me how NASCAR fits into Appalachian culture.
Well, first off, when I first started doing research on NASCAR, I really thought, because a lot of it's, when you get into the details of stuff, it's always a lot more complicated than you think. A lot of the stereotypes and the standard stories are kind of myths and stuff. And so the myth of NASCAR, was the whole, these moonshiners were, when the automobile came in, they got very good at modifying them and they were outrunning the law, and these, I don't know if you know the movie Thunder Road or anything, or the Dukes of Hazzard, that kind of thing. Right. So these good old boys, and hopping up these cars, would come, and then they start racing, and so I thought, that's a great story. And for sure there were people like that. I mean, Junior Johnson is very much a legend, and he obviously, he had a criminal record. He served time in the federal penitentiary, for moonshine. His family had deep roots, and I thought, well, there's some Junior Johnsons, but that's exaggerated. And so I really thought, what I'd find was that moonshine didn't have that much of an impact. But as I put it in the introduction of the book, I said, the deeper I looked, the more liquor I found. And so it just really permeated. And so most of the early drivers were people that gained their first high-speed driving experience behind the wheel of a car hauling liquor, and develop mechanical ability. But then as the sport develops in the late 30s and early 40s, you see people who are mechanics. I mean, a good way to make a living in any of these regions was to work on cars, and particularly moonshiners' cars, because they paid cash, And so, so some of these people got really good, some of the moonshiners themselves, but, local mechanics got really good because they had a lot of money to work on things and incentive to do that, and so then that translates into racing. Then you got, okay, these people have cash they need to do something with, so a lot of the promoters were people who were kind of big time in the liquor business, and they're moving cash. And then even the people that built the racetracks in the early days, a lot of them were
liquor money.
So
did NASCAR start here?
NASCAR starts, technically in Daytona.
Okay.
Daytona Beach. Bill France, who was a mechanic who moved to the area, and he gets involved. They originally raced on the beach at Daytona. That was the biggest race of the year. But then it spreads through the region, and as it spreads through the region, these moonshiners start coming in, and all of a sudden you got people like Lloyd C. He shows up in Atlanta at Lakewood Speedway for one of the first big stock car races there. He's 18 years old. Nobody's heard of him, and he wins the race. The Atlanta Constitution has an article the next day that says nobody heard of Lloyd C., and he comes out of nowhere to win this race against some of the top race drivers in the country. It said nobody heard of him except for the Atlanta police. And, and at 18, he already had a long record and reputation, for hauling liquor out of Dawson County.
I heard a guy say the other day, he said, if you want to find the real race car drivers, he said, find the revenue officers that were good at catching these guys.
Well, the revenue officers were generally outgunned because they were driving some crappy government car, and this guy had, every performance part you could buy out of California, on it. So, all the way from, Bill France. There's some questions about Bill France, but, and the France family still owns NASCAR. he definitely knew lots of people, and he always denied that he knew anything about it, but he knew, and actually was business partners with lots of people. And again, most of the people, again, track owners, promoters, car owners, mechanics, and then drivers themselves, were people who got their experience or their money, out of illegal liquor. So the very foundation of NASCAR is illegal liquor.
That is interesting.
NASCAR doesn't like to talk about that, but it's foundational.
I tell you who else can drive good in the Appalachians, and that's bear hunters. Modern day bear hunters trying to cut off dog races. Yeah. Tell me what you know about bear hunting with hounds. We earlier we talked about how there was a free range hog culture here, pretty dominant, and those guys would have for sure been using dogs to round it up. Is that where North Carolina, this part of the world has such a rich history with hound hunting, from the Plott hound, which is the state dog of North Carolina, which was a bear and hog dog, a big game dog. Tell me what you know about bear hunting with hounds.
Yeah. This is part of the German influence, actually, the hunting with hounds, because again, it's more of and I guess people who work for the nobility, brought those skills and brought dogs with them.
Right.
In many cases. And so, these breeds develop. But, bear hunting early on in particular, of course, hunting becomes important for subsistence. Bear grease and, maybe a bear hide or something could be good, but it's not exactly necessary for your subsistence. But it's a communal activity. I mean, traditionally, the way bears are hunted, and again, this is, you go back to the Cherokee and what these people learned from the Cherokee. But again, they're bringing something new to the equation, which are hounds. And so, but it's an important communal activity. And you go, I mean, even today, you go, I mean, it's like, it's generational.
Yeah.
You got the old guy, who's been doing it for years and has that deep knowledge, and then the younger guys who can still run the mountains, and then the kids. You see, a lot of boys and you'll see girls these days, out with these folks on a bear hunt.
Here is our secret topic. My curiosity pushed me to ask Dr. Pierce about the snake handling churches of Appalachia, made famous by some recent television shows. Honestly, I'm hesitant to bring it up for fear that drawing attention to this would paint an untrue picture of the vast majority of Christians in southern Appalachia, but I decided to leave in this portion of our interview. You'll have a greater chance of being struck by lightning than meeting someone who handles snakes for ceremony. It's extremely rare. I also want to say that I believe deeply in religious freedom. So my intent is not to mar anyone's reputation or bring into question their motives, but purely to peer with a curious eye into the snake handling phenomena. Dr. Pierce, you hear of these snake handling churches in the Appalachians. And I know that there are churches that do that. How common is that? Is that sensationalized? And kind of where did that start?
Yeah, it is sensationalized, and of course, cable's picked up on, I think there was a show called Snake Salvation or something like that, on some cable channel, but, and it's something, it's kind of an interesting history in terms it grows out of Cleveland, Tennessee area. And there's a guy in that area named George Hensley who a lot of the start of this is credit to, who's kind of alternately a preacher and a rounder, moonshiner, it just depended, he'd repent and come back, but he takes, is it Mark 16, I think?
Right, there's a biblical passage in the Gospels
that says, and it's really interesting, someone who's interested in religious history as well, but that someone didn't do this earlier, Did
it totally have its roots here? Nowhere else in the world they were handling snakes.
No, not that I know of.
And it's the one scripture that says you'll handle deadly serpents and will not be harmed.
Right.
Essentially is what it
drink
says.
Poison and stuff like that. So you see this type of thing. They'll drink strychnine in some of these. So this is early 20th century, and it kind of becomes, just for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's hard to why do people do things religiously, but I think it does relate to these are very rural churches. They're very poor congregations generally. Partly it is something that'll definitely give you some distinction in your community if you're willing to grab a rattlesnake, and hold it up. And one of the things that's really, and I've never actually witnessed it in person. I know a number of people that have, and the thing that that even people. I remember I had a Jewish friend in graduate school, and she actually saw this, and her reaction was just like, I just can't believe the faith. And actually, there have been several accounts of scholars or reporters or people who have been covering this, and they get kind of sucked into it themselves. It's kind of weird. There's a very famous book called Salvation on Sand Mountain, a guy named Dennis Covington, who was a reporter for the New York Times. He ends up handling snakes. And it's kind of a seduction in some. Again, it's relatively small. You did have a period in the late 20s and into the 1930s where you would have big outdoor meetings, with hundreds, if not thousands of people, in some parts of the region. And then the government started cracking down because people were dying.
Really? The government came in and said,
it is illegal in most states, and maybe illegal everywhere, so to do this. And, there have been a number of court cases, like endangering children and, things like this. But it's small, and it's really small now, but it still happens, and it kind of goes in waves. It'll kind of pop up, in a place, and then all of a sudden you got this. But and of course, the stereotype is every church in the region,
which is
is
just
like,
not true.
Okay, when are they going to pull out the snakes? It's a very small.
Do you think? And I have a religious background for sure. It seems like maybe early on, and I don't know. I haven't seen these documentaries, these newer ones about snake. I don't know a lot about it. I mean, perhaps maybe there was some genuineness inside of it, maybe at one time, and then at least what I see portrayed feels like some of the newer stuff is kind of sensationalism, like purposeful sensationalism. And I'm putting judgment on people and things I don't know about, but I mean, do you think that would be true?
Yeah, and I think partly, the conditions that made it meaningful to people are not as common.
Okay.
And so, and it is a way, if you want to attract attention to yourself, it's definitely a way to do it. And there are always, some documentarian that wants to come film you or reporter that wants to do a story on it, and particularly when somebody dies, and there are costs to being involved because most of the famous people ended up dying from a snake bite, even though they may have been bit, like George Hensley eventually dies from snake bite, even though he'd been bit dozens, if not more, times.
How does that fit with all that you know of Appalachian culture? Does that just like fit in, or is that just such a small, minor thing that it's kind of irrelevant? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I think there are some things. Again, the appeal, as you might think, is limited. To a certain, I don't know, to I guess a certain personality or something. But I think there are some things in the region that do kind of lend itself to that, and part of it, there's a strong dose in a lot of Southern Appalachian religion, fatalism, that plays into that. There's a part of something that if you're in really bad circumstances, like my life is pretty confining and drab and tragic in some ways, but here is a way that I can transcend all that. It's hard to imagine what most people can't imagine it, I don't think, but what the emotions of that would be. It would be a powerful thing. And so I think the material conditions of the region did at least, I think feed into that.
Appalachia is a fascinating and beautiful place with a diverse mix of incredible people and families that have been crafted by a complicated history. There are people with a journey tied close to the land. Honestly, every place on earth has such a story, and they're all important stories. I find myself often rooting for the underdog, for the piece of the story that's untold, or for the people who are misunderstood, or the people whose story isn't always told correctly. I can't tell all those stories, but maybe the ones I do tell can spur us to dig deeper into the stories of those all around us. I continue to stand on the premise that our appreciation of our own culture makes us more likely to value the culture of another. In closing, I believe that an authentic connection to the land helps define part of our humanity, whether it be through bear hunting with hounds or farming tomatoes like Mr. Roy, or simply by going on a hike where you live and taking a moment to be formally amazed at the architecture and complexity of a tree. However you do it, I hope it will cause you to ponder your own significance on this planet. Long live the regional cultures of this incredible place called planet Earth. Hey, please leave us a big fat review on iTunes and tell all your pals about this here podcast. Thanks.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Maui Nui is on a mission to help balance axis deer populations for the good of our environment, communities, and food systems on the island of Maui. They've shared over 126,000 pounds of nutrient-dense protein with the Maui community. Secure your spot now. Become a snack subscriber and join in helping to build more resilient food and ecosystems on Maui. Visit MauiNuiVenison.com. That's MAUINUI venison.com and use promo code BEAR for 20% off your first order.